and welcome to another edition of Civically Speaking, held by Seattle City Club. I'm Alicia Crank, the Executive Director, and I am joined with Pete Serrano, who is running for Washington State's Attorney General. Hi, Pete. How are you?
Hey, Alicia. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on today.
Well, thanks for joining us while you're on the road. Where are you headed right now?
I'm actually headed up to King County up for a Seattle Times editorial board interview.
Good luck to you all. So, the question I've been asking every candidate, whether they're running for statewide office or local, is why you and why now?
By me, I've spent the past 15 years of my life as a practicing attorney really focusing on restoring rights to people, protecting them from government overreach, and really pushing government transparency. And we've seen in Washington State, specifically through the Attorney General's office, there's been quite a lack of recent transparency and a lot of government overreach. And it's time to really bring back some power to the people, make sure they're informed, and make sure they're protected. And so that's the real nutshell of why me and why now.
So currently, you're on the Pasco City Council and you're the current mayor.
I'm the mayor of Pasco. I've been on council for 6 years now, and it's been a great opportunity to really serve my community.
And we talk about, I was really interested in your work with the Department of Energy and the Hanford site specifically. So I'm showing that on the screen right now for people. Can you talk a little bit more about that work and what that was for you? Because I know that, especially in this state, there's a lot of, energy and climate related topics that people are trying to navigate through. And it would be interesting to hear what your work was around this.
Absolutely. Thank you. So for anyone that doesn't know what the Hanford site is, it's United States government land. It was almost 600 square miles, not acres, but miles. So think of a large swath of land that's surrounded by the Columbia River, north and east, and a little bit south. And its purpose during World War II to help produce plutonium for the atomic bombs. There were also several variations of actually nuclear reactor technologies that came through the Hanford site. They actually have currently an operating, not DOE, but through the state agency Energy Northwest, there's an operating nuclear power facility, a station that transmits power up and down the West Coast, all the way down to Oregon, through obviously Washington, into Idaho, and there are other places where that is sold and transmitted. But cleaning up Hanford has been this, U.S. government where the goal was to take, areas, clean them up, transfer them into either public or private lands. Again, Energy Northwest being cited there makes a ton of sense because there's already some remnants of nuclear facilities. That was the solar generation farm. So the Department of Energy is now moving away from production of these nuclear materials were used for weapons grade during World War II. Their production of alternate technologies, whether it be sun or additional new nuclear facilities to produce power for the consumer. And it's really cool that they've gone from this, oh, there's a mess out here, to let's clean this. And I don't mean a mess like it's bad over, but there's clean it up, let's make it safe, and let's actually use it for the good of the people. Like you've said, these new technologies, new opportunity, actually power. And I love being part of that.
Yeah. So you're saying you're in the car headed to King County. So this is probably a good question to ask at this point. Part of what's on your platform is about public safety and law enforcement. And of course, in King County, specifically Seattle, there's, a lot, So how would you some of the issues around law enforcement, especially around what's going on with the Seattle Police Department, lack of staffing, coverage and crimes that are not being managed or circumvented by lack of staffing?
Yeah, so we kind of one is the staffing, where the Attorney General can actually offer resources to local prosecuting attorneys, local sheriff's offices, and other agencies. So that resource can grant funding, and I don't know that it can necessarily be used for staffing per se, but let's say technology, some DNA type thing or something of that nature, or we've seen Bob Ferguson lately has been offering rape kits, right? So there's an option to share those resources with your local jurisdictions. You can do it at their request, or you can do it and say, hey, look, I know you guys are failing in X, Y, or Z. what can I, as the Attorney General, offer to assist you in solving crimes and in protecting the people of King County or the state of Washington? That's kind of mantra number one. The first being working with the legislature and saying, hey, look, we've got to make sure that crimes are able to be prosecuted, that you're giving the resources, you as a legislature are giving the resources to the agencies that need to prosecute crimes, but also that the legislature is not pulling back the ability to enforce law. We saw the police pursuit mess, and that even came up through a people's initiative to make sure that the police retain the ability to do their job. We need to make sure the legislature isn't handcuffing our law enforcement. Speaking with our local PD in Pasco, I know morale has been low because they do their job and then someone gets released, quickly on bail, or they can't do their job and they see a fatality. We've had so many wrong way fatalities on the highway because the police just simply can't chase the bad guys. The second thing on that point is working with courts. We've had released under this notion they don't have the access to a speedy trial. We need to make public defenders or staff as well as prosecutors, and two, that one found guilty, convicted, that they actually stay in prison. We can't just let them out because the budget doesn't allow it. We've had several of our lower detention facilities that actually, and we've seen that recently there's a man in Oregon released early out of a opposing prison situation who then went and raped and murdered several women. So, prisoners who convicted, gone through the trial, they need to sit put and stay in prison so that our streets can be safe.
Perfect. So I have another question for you. So one of the reasons why I think that this election for this office is going to be super significant this year is because there's no incumbent. So a lot of people that are kind of re-electoral process, there isn't the incumbent's going to win, so why bother? There are more people hopefully now paying more attention to who's running and why. So my question for you is, what sets you from your other competitors? What's going to make you stand out?
We each have one set of strengths, right? Senator D in the Senate, Mr. Brown's had some great appointed positions, and I've been actively servicing my community. I've been actively engaged in Pasco. I've actually held an elected position, and I'm leading our be one of the safest communities in the state of Washington. I think that track record of making sure that Pasco is as safe and opening and welcoming as possible is ultimately critical. You compound that with, as you mentioned, my experience on the Hanford site, whether it was producing nuclear power and working on new generational technology that would power the Pacific Northwest for centuries to come, or whether it was actually cleaning up what was left from 50, 60, 70 years ago. Those are highlights that are specific to Pete Serrano that we don't have general overlap on. I've made sure, again, my community is safe and clean. And it's not just, hey, I want to volunteer for a day to pick up garbage, which is certainly laudable. And I hope that, I'd love Seattle CityClub or anyone else. If you guys have days of service, I'd love to come up, be present, show people that this guy's really cares about the community. And, again, I know things, but those global environmental protection strategies that I've helped implement as an attorney and advise on at the highest level, I think that really distinguishes me.
Well, I'm going to that offer to do a day of service with us. I plan what we call a civic boot camp, and we're going to do it around the arts and murals across the area. But there's two really great nonprofits that combine that with like neighborhood preservation.
Well, we're telling Alicia because you like Barry Sanders.
Now yes, I love you for knowing that that's a Barry Sanders jersey. So again, I think another question that might sound a little simple, but I think there's some people like an answer to this, which is, what do you see is the role of the Attorney General in this state? And I ask that because when I have talked to a few members of City, or just those that have come to our events, we've talked about the fact that we're going to convene a debate for the Attorney General's race in the fall, get past the primary. But a lot of people don't really know what the AG does. If anything, what I hear is, oh, they do the big lawsuits that comes. I thought about that. I was like, that's actually kind of true. So for those that only know that as what happens with the Attorney General's office, can you talk to your visit that the AG should be doing, or what that role is for the people of the state?
Yeah, absolutely. The Attorney General's office, I mean, kind of talking about 13 physical offices, a staff of somewhere between, I've seen numbers that range either from 12 to 1,600 people, with 800 plus attorneys and a $700 million budget. Okay, that's an annual budget. The second issue is probably the most important, which is advising government agencies. The governor appoints some 2,000 individuals to be heads or executive appointees of agencies that we have in the state of Washington. And those agencies are coming to the Attorney General's office for advice. And the third one, and this is a struggle that we've seen out of the current administration, Mr. Ferguson's office, the AG's office should be abundantly transparent in his or her communications with those clients where possible. And I know there's the lawyer words of where possible, but there are certain times where you can't divulge information under the attorney-client privilege. But we've also seen on various issues, the Attorney General's office has hid evidence in the court of law, as well as at requests of Public Records Act requesters. The AG's office needs to build a bridge of trust with the people of Washington to know that he's working on their behalf. In my opinion, Bob Ferguson's office is fundamentally flawed and failed in doing so. And when I'm elected, I will be here to be as robustly transparent as the law will allow me, and as much as I can without, overstepping my attorney boundaries.
I would be remiss if I don't ask about the three Bobs filing that happened. So if that were you, like, how do you feel it's handled? How did you feel about the whole thing? If you want to talk about that, or what would you have done differently as if you were in that position?
So the three Bobs filing, look, where Mr. Ferguson handled that was he brought out a former King County prosecutor and then started to talk about the criminality of one subsection of the law. And now, as attorneys, we have absolute duties. Law says it's a proven, and in this case, it required the showing basically of nefarious intent. I don't have the words specifically at hand, but the purpose was to creating confusion. Now, Bob Ferguson cited what he saw as both direct and circumstantial evidence from Glenn Morgan as adequate to demonstrate that those other Bobs, the two or three that angled, that they could be in violation of the law. Well, to me, Bob Ferguson, when he issued the press conference, starts off as, "I'm Attorney General Bob Ferguson and candidate for governor." He announces his position of authority, has Dan Satterberg, former King County prosecutor, to his left or right, whatever side. And then they start talking about how to enforce the law. Well, mind you, it would have been more appropriately done in Thurston County with the prosecutor, but the prosecutor probably didn't want to weigh in. And so where I think Mr. Ferguson overstepped is he really, really pushed this notion of sure that you're prosecuted. Not ever did he say, in my opinion, give any notion that these could be serious candidates. And he just summarily dismissed them based on their association with Glenn Morgan. And to me, he should have said, "Hey, we saw this. We've requested the Secretary of State." The other notion that he suggested and enter the end, pretty harsh directives to Mr. Hobbs, the Secretary of State, saying you must do this. You should. Hobbs has independent discretion in his office as Secretary of State to, use the regulations and at his, choosing. This notion that one way or the other, to me, also felt like that was a little bit overhanded. So I think had Mr. Ferguson simply said, "Yeah, we caught this. We've raised the issue. We flagged it with the Secretary of State. We've suggested paths forward," and we left it at that. But, when he really demanded that they reorganize the order, to me, that was well beyond what he should have done.
Okay. So the last question now for you, a little bit on the heavy side, because of course, we've talked about public leasing. We've talked about the environment a little bit, but of course, something else that's kind of up in the air. A lot of people with a lot of strong opinions is firearms and the use thereof, who can own what, magazines, sizes, so on and so forth. And so I just want to know in general, kind of what is your stand in gun ownership in Washington State, and what would you do differently, if anything, as the AG?
Yeah, second, I'm an advocate. I've litigated the issue because I think the Constitution, both federally and state, are very clear. Under the Article 1, Section 24 of the Washington Constitution, it says that the right to bear arms shall not be impaired. And I do understand that we are dealing with diseases, especially mental illnesses, that probably didn't exist or not have been as pervasive when these documents were written. I do believe that there's a right side of ensuring guys, gals don't get guns. That those who are unable to safely use them and store them should not have access to them. But I do think the issue is not per se the gun. I think the issue is finding real treatment methodologies for our youth in particular, and for any of those suffering from mental illness. We need to make sure that those people are well treated and taken care of. And I'm not suggesting they're all criminals. No one should be criminalized for a mental illness or for having suffered trauma. And sometimes there may be relinquishment of firearms. Sometimes that will occur based on the individual's choice. And sometimes that will be based on the effects of that choice, meaning individual's a criminal, therefore has no rights to bear firearms. So I do think that there's some good legislation. I have concerns with all out bans on particular firearms. I'm very concerned, for example, you saw one of the bills prohibited mass transit. And then a couple weeks after, or a couple weeks ago, there was a stabbing on Sound Transit. Well, whether you're prohibiting a knife or a gun, if someone else doesn't obey the law, you're putting yourself in a situation. And part of that, some at the request of the Attorney General's office, I built for making sure that individuals have the ability to safely use firearms, especially in opportunities for self-defense. But I have serious concerns about just whittling away. It's much larger.
You get the final word before we close out today. And thank you for joining me on the road. I'm sure you're going through all kinds of dips and valleys trying to get over here to King County. What is it that you want voters to know about you that maybe isn't coming through in other capacities?
Yeah, I want voters to know I'm doing this. 3 young children and a wife that look to me as not just a man to provide means for them, but also as a protector. I take that role and as a husband very seriously. My focus again, let's make Washington safe. Let's harness our resources, and let's be transparent about what we're doing. And if we do that, the people of Washington will benefit greatly from Pete Serrano as Attorney General.
And thank you so much for again taking time out. This has been Civically Speaking with Seattle City Club. And I'm sure that we'll see you in one capacity or another coming up, especially when we start working on our debates for this fall. So take care.